But there's an old photographer's trick, um, that when photographers were in the dark room printing, they would print a diffusion into their images. So they, let's say you put a piece of paper under the enlarger and you've got your negative in there, and you hit the timer and you're going to expose your paper for 30 seconds to make the print. For about 10 or 15 of those seconds, photographer would hold just a piece of cellophane or something under the lens that would soften the image and kind of throw it a little bit out of focus. And so you'd have this partly diffused and partly sharp photograph. And it creates this soft glow, which just kind of lends this, it makes the light look alive in the image. And that's what I want to show you, and what I'm going to have you try for like a next homework assignment. So I mean, there are a couple of ways that you can do it in Lightroom. And that's using the presence. So if I zoom in a little bit more here, the clarity. If I bring the clarity up, you can see it makes everything really contrasty, and it's not necessarily the way you want to go with a portrait. If I start bringing the clarity down, you'll see the whole thing starts to look, it's not really out of focus, but the edges are really soft. We lose the texture in the skin tone, but we start to lose the texture in the hair as well. And I could do the same thing using the if you bring the texture up, it's not the way we want to go with this portrait. I can bring the texture down, it starts to soften it, and it's okay. You see, it's a little bit soft around the edges, but there's still some clarity. So, it creates this nice sort of glow. But I've never been happy with this particular approach. And the reason is this, and this is really hard to explain. When I bring the texture down, what this is doing is taking the highlight areas, and it's like pushing them out at the edge. And so you're pushing the highlights into the shadow areas. And as a result, your edges become a little bit ill-defined, and for me, the entire effect is a little bit too soft focus, and soft focus is not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is just this sort of this sort of glow, and this slight diffusion which softens the skin tones a little. And the texture is not really not the way I want to go about doing this. Excuse me. In a pinch it works fine, but it's not what I want. So I'm going to move this photograph into Photoshop, and I'm going to follow these guidelines, which are linked on Blackboard. They are in the Google Docs folder under week 10-11. It's called Adding a Diffuse Glow to Your Portraits Using Adobe Photoshop. All right, so the whole outlay is right here on this sheet. Okay, so I'm in Lightroom. Now I've made a virtual copy of my image. You don't have to, but I usually do when I'm doing this stuff. So anyway, so I have my virtual copy, and I'm going to move this into Photoshop so that I can work on it. So I begin now. I'm using the Lightroom Classic. If you're using the Lightroom Creative Cloud, it's a little bit different. With the Lightroom Classic, I go to Photo, Edit in Photoshop. If you are using the Creative Cloud, it's under File. It's File, Edit in Photoshop. Either way, the shortcut is Command E or Control E if you're on a PC. So, Photo, Edit in Adobe Photoshop. So I click this. It's going to create another copy, and it's going to take that copy and load it up in Photoshop. So now my copy is in Photoshop, and it puts Lightroom in the background, puts Photoshop in the foreground. Okay, so here's my image. Now you'll notice that I have my toolbar down the left-hand side, and I have my Layers tab and all my navigation tools on the right-hand side. Now, if I zoom, oh, sorry. You'll notice on the right-hand side, it's showing I have a single layer, a background layer. I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer. There are a couple different ways of doing it. I can hit the Command J, which will make a separate layer. Okay, there we go. Or I can go to Layer, Duplicate Layer. Boop. Background copy, that's fine. I can name it anything I want. So actually, maybe, let's see, I'll change the name of this to Diffusion Layer. So I know that's the layer where I'm going to have my diffusion stuff. So my diffusion layer is a duplicate of my background layer. Awesome. Okay. So we'll make all the modifications to this diffusion layer. Pretty simple process from here on out. There are a couple different ways of going about this, and I've tried a few of them, some of them recommended by highly skilled professionals on Photoshop tutorial websites, but this is the one that I like the most. I want to make a diffusion layer on this top layer. And to do that, I am going to use the filters. There are lots of different filters in this, and there's a filter gallery which we can open up, and I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to go Filter, and I'm going to go down into the blur filters, and there are lots and lots of blur filters, and I'm going to use an old standby, the Gaussian blur. There's motion blurs, there's lens blurs that make it look like it's out of focus from camera lens, radial blur that will make that will spin it, and zoom blurs. There's all sorts. We're just going to use the Gaussian blur, which actually you can see in the background what it's doing. It's kind of throwing the image out of focus, but it's just making it more or less out of focus. All right, I'm going to zoom out just a little here so that I can get my get these about the same size here. Okay. I'm going to set the blur radius at 25 pixels. It throws it out of focus, but there's a little slight bit of detail. You can go more than that. You can throw it a little bit more out of focus. I probably wouldn't go past 50. We can try 35. We'll go 35 and see what happens. I think I have 25 marked in the book here. So what I'm doing is taking this top layer and I'm blurring it. Easy. Okay. So now I have a top layer that's been diffused and a bottom layer that's still sharp. And I'm going to combine these two layers so that I get a little bit of both things. I'll turn my diffusion back on. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see a little bit better what's going on. Okay. I'm going to make some adjustments to this layer, and I'm going to do it right over here in the layers palette. Opacity is the strength of this layer. So I can make this layer 100% opaque, or I can make this layer partly transparent. All right, so you can see it's a transparent layer now. So the bottom layer is showing through. So I've got this diffusion layer on top, but it's partly transparent. Bottom layer is showing through. Bottom layer is the sharp layer. I'm going to move this opacity down to about 25%. I think that's what I recommended. Yes. So I've got it at about 25%. So if I'll zoom in a little bit more, you can still see plenty of detail. But there's a little bit of that glow that's starting to show up. We still have, however, the same approach, the same result that we were getting in Lightroom. The highlights are spreading out and landing on top of the shadows. So the highlight tones are spilling out and covering the shadow tones. I want to reverse that so that the shadow tones actually spread out towards the highlights. What happens is you get a tighter edge and you get better definition between the highlights and the shadows. So I do that. Let me come back out here. Oop. I do that by changing the blending mode here. All right, my opacity is at 25-ish, 26%. My blending mode is normal. It's just a transparent top layer over an opaque bottom layer. So I'm going to try, and I'll roll through these and you'll see the way the different blending modes affects how the photo reads. Dissolve, you can see it, it kind of looks grainy. It's actually looking for the highlights and the shadows, and one is dissolving the other a little bit, and it makes it look like it's been scrubbed down. Not what we want. If I go to darken, wow, look what happens. Now, if I change this from normal, which just looks lightly fuzzy, and go to darken, look at the edges of the glasses. And you'll see it in the texture of the hair. Boom. The eyes all of a sudden are really sharp. The glasses are really sharp. The texture of the hair is really sharp. If I go back to normal, it's kind of like like a dirty glass. So darken really. Look at the edge. Look at the edge right here, between the cheek and the hair. So normal, darken. Look how it just tightens everything up. So darken works really well. Multiply also works. And that actually, boy, it almost adds a little bit more while still keeping that glow. Darken works. Multiply works. This other stuff's not really doing what I want. The other one that might work is overlay. Doesn't work for this one. I think it was darken, multiply, and darker color. That was the other one that works pretty well. Excuse me, cat hair. But I'm going to go with the darken. Okay. So I'm going to zoom my image out a little bit. And now I've got, I don't know if it's reading for you or not, but I'll put this photograph online so you can actually download it and take a look at it and tell me what you think. So this has a little bit of that glow. Now I can muss around with this little. If I bring the opacity up a little and make this more glowy. See, now it's more glowy. Now it's the light colors are starting to spill a little bit more than I want. So I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to go back. You know, I don't really like it past about 30%. So I'm going to just go back. I'm going to go back to 25. Okay. So now I have my portrait, and it's just got this slightest bit of glow to it, which softens the skin tone slightly without knocking down any detail, and it deepens the texture of the hair a little bit, sharpens up the texture around the eyes and the glasses in this case. Okay, so I'm cool here, and that's everything I wanted to do. So now I need to save this file. Save. I don't have to save as. I don't have to do anything. Just save it. You see right here it's telling me it's saving it. 99% saved. So now that it's saved, I don't have to quit Photoshop, but I'm going to close the image. So the image is closed, and I'm going to go back to Lightroom. And now I have my edited image.